In the year 106 BCE, in the fertile hills of Picenum along the Adriatic coast of Italy, a boy was born into a household already touched by the hand of war. His father, Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo, was a man both feared and admired, a stern Roman general whose ambition was as hard as the steel of his sword. From an early age, the boy, also named Gnaeus Pompeius, watched the march of legions, the clash of iron, and the bitter feuds that tore Rome apart. Pompeius Strabo was known for his cruelty, but he was also a man of immense military ability. Soldiers respected him, though few loved him. His son absorbed every detail, every command, every gesture of authority. Where other boys chased games in the street, young Pompey studied war. His eyes glowed whenever tales of Alexander the Great were told, and he whispered to himself in the quiet hours that one day, he too would carve his name into the world. When Pompey was only a teenager, fate thrust him forward. His father died suddenly, leaving behind not only wealth and land but also a hardened core of veteran soldiers who had fought loyally under the Pompeian banner. These men, grizzled and scarred, looked to the young heir. Most Roman youths of 19 would have squandered their fortune in games and feasts. Pompey did not. He stood before his father's veterans, his voice steady, his presence commanding. "You followed my father into battle," he told them. "Now, if you will, follow me. I will lead you not into disgrace, but into glory greater than any you have known." The soldiers, struck by his calm authority, swore their loyalty. Thus, at an age when most Roman nobles still played the student, Pompey commanded his own legions. Rome itself was boiling in chaos. The old republic trembled between the power of Marius, champion of the populares, and Sulla, the ruthless general of the optimates. Civil war ripped through the city. Streets ran red, and the Senate was torn apart by fear. The young Pompey chose Sulla. Some whispered it was reckless, others claimed it was genius, but Pompey saw clearly, Sulla's star was rising. He gathered 3 legions of his father's veterans and marched to Sulla's camp. The dictator eyed him coldly, his suspicion sharpened by years of betrayal. Sulla trusted no one, yet when he looked at this boy, there was something different. So, Sulla said, "You bring an army to me. What should I call you? A boy playing at war? Or a butcher, eager for blood?" Pompey met his gaze without flinching. "Call me whatever you will. But judge me by what I do, not what I am called." Sulla laughed, though uneasily. He muttered to his advisers that the people already called Pompey the teenage butcher. Then, half in jest and half in prophecy, he said, "Take care, Romans. I see in this young man the shadow of Alexander the Great." Pompey bowed, hiding the fire that burned within. Alexander the Great, the name filled his soul. If even Sulla, master of Rome, saw such a likeness, then perhaps the gods themselves had marked his path. Pompey's first campaigns were swift and merciless. In Sicily and Africa, Marian forces resisted Rome. Pompey descended on them like a storm. Enemy generals fell, cities surrendered, and Rome's grain supply was secured. So ruthless was his efficiency that in Africa, his men called him a dull sensualist carnifex, the teenage butcher. Yet the Senate could not deny his effectiveness. When he returned to Rome, Pompey demanded a triumph, the greatest honor a general could receive. By law, he was far too young and had held no office. The Senate resisted, mocking him as arrogant. But the people clamored for their hero. Sulla, grim as ever, shook his head but yielded. And so, the streets of Rome thundered with celebration. Pompey rode in a golden chariot, laurel wreath upon his brow. Captives marched before him, spoils glittered, and the crowd chanted Magnus. Magnus, the Great. At only 26, Pompey had achieved what most men could not dream of in a lifetime. The name, Magnus, given first as jest, became prophecy. But Pompey was not content. He knew Rome's enemies still stalked the world. The Mediterranean groaned under the terror of pirates. They swept from hidden coves, raiding coastlines, burning ships, and taking slaves. Even Roman nobles were kidnapped, ransomed back for gold. The seas that once fed Rome now starved her. Grain prices soared, and famine whispered through the markets. The Senate was desperate. They needed a man of genius, of daring, of proven strength. They turned again to Pompey. Yet when they proposed giving him supreme command of the seas, many senators balked. The power was unprecedented, more fitting for a king than a Roman. To hand such authority to one man was dangerous. But the people roared their approval. The starving masses would not hear arguments of law while their children cried for bread. At last, the Senate relented. Pompey was given command over the entire Mediterranean, his authority stretching 50 miles inland from every coast. His word was law, his power unmatched. The pirates laughed when they heard. For generations, Rome had failed to break them. They believed Pompey would be no different. But Pompey was no ordinary commander. He did not charge blindly into the sea. He divided the vast waters into 13 zones, assigning each to trusted lieutenants. His strategy was swift, precise, unrelenting. First, he struck the western seas. Within 40 days, the pirates there were crushed. Then, with thunderous speed, he swept eastward. One haven after another fell, pirate fleets shattered, strongholds destroyed. Some pirates were crucified as examples, but others he resettled, offering them land and peace if they abandoned their trade. Rome was astonished. In just 3 months, the Mediterranean was cleared. The sea lanes flowed with grain once more, markets filled, and famine retreated. The people hailed Pompey as their savior. Merchants blessed his name, farmers praised him, and mothers spoke of him as protector of Rome's children. Standing before the Senate, Pompey's words carried both triumph and warning. Rome is mistress of the world, he declared, but if she cannot master the seas, she is nothing. I have given her peace upon the waters. But beyond those waters lie kings who defy us still. If it is Rome's will, I will march east, and from the mountains of Pontus to the deserts of Syria, Rome will reign supreme. The senators listened, some in awe, others in fear. For they knew Pompey was not merely a soldier, he was becoming something greater. And though the people adored him, in the shadows of the Senate, jealous rivals began to whisper. But Pompey cared little for whispers. His eyes looked east, where a king named Mithridates still defied Rome. A king who had fought Rome for 40 years. A king who believed no Roman general could break him. Pompey smiled. Soon, that belief would shatter. The year was 66 BCE. The Mediterranean lay quiet at last, freed from the terror of pirates. Merchants once again sailed unafraid, grain flowed into Rome, and the people blessed the name of Pompey. But the Senate knew peace at sea was not enough. For far to the east, a king still defied Rome, a man whose name was spoken with dread and admiration alike, Mithridates VI of Pontus. For 40 years, Mithridates had waged war against Rome. He had massacred thousands of Romans in Asia Minor, humiliated generals, and survived defeat after defeat with the resilience of a serpent. Rome had sent armies against him, but none could destroy him. Lucullus had struck him hard, but in the mountains and plains of Asia, Mithridates had endured. The Senate now turned to Pompey. The decision was not without controversy. Pompey had already been given immense powers to defeat the pirates. To grant him command in the east as well was unprecedented, bordering on monarchy. But the people demanded it. They remembered their empty bellies and saw only one man who had restored Rome's grain. In the end, their voices overwhelmed the cautious senators. Pompey was appointed with absolute command. When the news reached him, Pompey did not boast. He simply said, "Rome does not ask twice. If the Senate and the people send me east, then east I shall go." Yet within him, a fire kindled. Mithridates was no ordinary enemy. To destroy him would be to surpass every Roman general before him. Pompey marched east with legions hardened by victory. His approach was methodical, swift, and relentless. The cities of Asia, weary of war, opened their gates without resistance. Kings sought his favor rather than his wrath. Yet Mithridates would not submit. He withdrew into the wild lands, striking when least expected, vanishing into the mountains like a ghost. One night in his tent, Pompey studied the maps laid before him. His officers urged caution. Mithridates is a shadow, Magnus, one centurion warned. Chase him too far and we risk losing ourselves in the wilderness. Pompey's eyes blazed in the lamplight. Rome does not chase shadows. Rome casts them away. If Mithridates hides in the mountains, we will hunt him there. If he flees to the ends of the earth, we will follow. The world must learn there is no refuge from Rome. And so he pursued. Across the Taurus mountains, through the rugged lands of Armenia, Pompey drove Mithridates before him. The king's allies fell away, one by one. Betrayal followed him like a curse. Finally, abandoned and broken, Mithridates chose death rather than capture. He drank poison, ending his long defiance. News of his death spread like thunder. The east was Rome's, but Pompey was not finished. From Pontus, he turned his gaze south. The Seleucid dynasty, heirs of Alexander's empire, ruled Syria in name, but in truth their kingdom was a ruin. Civil war, weak kings, and corruption had hollowed it out. Pompey marched into Syria with the ease of a man gathering fruit from a dying tree. In a single campaign, he swept it into the Roman fold. Merchants celebrated, cities flourished, and Rome's borders stretched wider than ever before. The Senate could scarcely believe it. Within a few years, Pompey had not only ended the pirate scourge but also reshaped the East itself. Yet even this was not the end. South of Syria, the kingdom of Judea was torn by civil war. Rival brothers Hyrcanus and Aristobulus fought for the throne, and both, in desperation, appealed to Pompey for arbitration. Pompey listened, but he was not fooled. He knew Judea's strategic value. Control of Judea meant control of the gateway to Egypt, the richest land of the Mediterranean. He marched south, and Aristobulus resisted. Jerusalem, the sacred city of the Jews, prepared for siege. For 3 months, Pompey's legions surrounded the holy city. Siege engines battered its walls, and trenches cut off its supplies. The defenders fought fiercely, for the temple was not just their sanctuary but their identity. Yet Rome's might was inexorable. At last, the walls cracked, and the legions stormed the city. Blood filled the streets, cries rose from the Temple Mount, and the Jews fought to the death. When the last resistance fell, Pompey himself entered the temple. The priests and people watched in horror as the Roman general stepped into the Holy of Holies, the most sacred chamber, a place where only the high priest was allowed. To them, it was sacrilege beyond imagination. But Pompey did not come to plunder. He gazed at the golden vessels, the sacred treasures, and the altar itself. His officers expected him to seize them, for Rome loved gold above all else. Instead, Pompey turned and ordered everything left untouched. Rome rules men, he said coldly, not gods. The city was subdued, Judea was placed under Roman control, and Pompey's fame spread farther still. To his supporters, he was not merely a general. He was a lawgiver, a bringer of order, a man who extended Rome's shadow from the western seas to the deserts of the east. When he returned to Rome in 61 BCE, the city erupted in celebration. His triumph was unlike anything Rome had ever seen. For 2 full days, the procession rolled through the streets. Spoils from Asia, Syria, and Judea dazzled the crowd. Exotic animals were displayed, treasures gleamed, and captive kings and princes walked in chains. The people could scarcely believe their eyes. Never before had Rome seen such wealth, such glory, such domination of the world. Pompey had redrawn the map of the earth itself. His name, once spoken in jest as Magnus, now seemed almost too small for his deeds. And yet, as he basked in glory, Pompey sensed the shadows gathering. In the Senate, many feared him. They whispered that no man should wield such power, that his greatness was dangerous. Jealous rivals plotted in silence, watching for his first mistake. Worse still, across the city another name was rising, Julius Caesar. Clever, ambitious, relentless. He had once been Pompey's ally, but already some whispered that Caesar's star was climbing too high. Pompey stood at the height of his glory, the conqueror of the East, the man who had no rival. But in Rome, glory was fleeting. Behind the cheers of the crowd, the seeds of rivalry and betrayal had already begun to grow. The city of Rome thundered with celebration at Pompey's triumph. He had returned from the East as the greatest conqueror of his age. Yet beneath the cheering, Rome's heart was uneasy. For in Rome, no man could stand too tall without inviting envy, suspicion, and betrayal. Pompey expected gratitude. He expected the Senate to honor his victories, to ratify his settlements in the East, to reward his veterans with land. But the Senate was cold. Cicero himself whispered that Pompey had become a man of no more use now that he had finished his wars. The aristocrats feared him. They resented his power, and so they resisted every measure he proposed. Pompey was stunned. He had given Rome more territory, more wealth, more security than any general in history. Yet the Senate treated him as if he were a threat. His pride was wounded, his patience tested. He began to seek new allies. It was then that Julius Caesar, returning from Spain, saw his chance. Caesar was bold, calculating, and ambitious. He knew Pompey craved respect and feared isolation. He also knew that the Senate distrusted both of them. So Caesar proposed an alliance so dangerous it would shake the Republic itself. Alongside them stood Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who hungered for power to match his wealth. Together, these 3 men formed what history would call the First Triumvirate, a secret pact to dominate Roman politics. With their combined influence, nothing was beyond reach. Caesar was elected consul, passing laws that favored Pompey's veterans and ratified his eastern settlements. Pompey married Caesar's daughter Julia, sealing their bond with family. For a time, the three ruled Rome as if it were their private dominion. But the alliance was fragile. Crassus yearned for military glory to match his riches. Pompey, though powerful, found his influence dimmed beside Caesar's rising brilliance. And Julia, the gentle bridge between the two men, died in childbirth. Soon after, Crassus fell in battle against the Parthians, his army annihilated at Carrhae. The triumvirate was broken, only Pompey and Caesar remained, and Rome was not wide enough for both. Whispers filled the forum. Senators muttered that Caesar's conquests in Gaul had made him too powerful, too dangerous. He commanded hardened legions, loyal only to him. The Senate urged Pompey to act, to defend the Republic. Pompey hesitated, torn between friendship and duty. But in time, ambition and suspicion won. You must choose, Magnus, the Senate declared. Either Caesar lays down his command, or Rome is lost. Pompey agreed. He would defend the Republic. But deep inside, he knew he was no longer the young general of unbroken victories. His legions were scattered, his veterans old, his strength dependent on the Senate's wavering support. Still, he believed Rome would stand with him. He believed the Republic itself was his shield. When Caesar learned of the Senate's decree, he did not hesitate. On a cold winter night in 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, declaring, "The die is cast." With that single step, Rome plunged into civil war. Panic erupted in the city. Senators fled, magistrates vanished, and the people murmured in fear. Pompey, unprepared for Caesar's speed, retreated. He declared that he would raise forces in the east, where his name still commanded loyalty. The Senate followed him, abandoning Rome to Caesar. Pompey told himself it was strategy. "We shall gather strength abroad," he said. "Better to fight with full might than be crushed at once." Yet in truth, doubt not at him. He had once been the unstoppable conqueror. Now he was the defender, retreating before Caesar's advance. Still, hope was not lost. Across Greece, Asia, and the East, Pompey gathered allies. Kings who once trembled before him now sent soldiers and gold. By the time he faced Caesar at Pharsalus in 48 BCE, his army outnumbered Caesar's nearly 2-1. On the eve of battle, Pompey's camp was filled with confidence. Senators dined, toasting victory. Some already argued over the rewards they would claim after Caesar's defeat. But Pompey himself was silent. He walked alone beneath the stars, haunted by visions of triumphs past. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "Rome will be mine again. Or nothing will remain." At dawn, the two armies clashed. Caesar's men, though outnumbered, fought with the fury of loyalty. Pompey's forces pressed hard, but confusion spread. Dust filled the air, orders were lost, and Caesar seized the moment. His veterans struck like a blade through Pompey's cavalry, turning the tide. Panic spread. The mighty army of Pompey, larger and grander, broke and fled. Senators who had boasted of victory now scrambled for their lives. The field was lost. Pompey, watching his legions collapse, felt the weight of destiny crushing him. He fled the battlefield, abandoning tent, banners, and pride. His path carried him not to Rome, not to glory, but to exile. Across the sea he sailed, seeking refuge in Egypt, where he believed the young King Ptolemy XIII would honor their alliance. But Egypt was a kingdom of intrigue. Ptolemy advisors feared Caesar more than they respected Pompey. To them, the once great Magnus was now a burden, a bargaining chip. On the shore of Pelusium, Pompey's ship anchored. He looked upon the coastline, weary but hopeful. Small boats approached to ferry him ashore. In one, Egyptian officers waited with smiles too thin, too rehearsed. Pompey turned to his companions. His wife Cornelia wept, begging him not to go. "They mean to betray you," she cried. But Pompey shook his head. "I have lived my life by honor. I will not cower like a thief. If death awaits me, then I shall meet it as Pompey Magnus." He stepped into the small boat, his face calm, his heart heavy. As they rowed toward the shore, he gazed back one last time at the sea, at the fading outline of the ship where his wife stood watching. Then, as he rose to step onto the sand, the blades flashed. The Egyptians struck swiftly, stabbing him again and again. Pompey Magnus, the conqueror of the East, the man whom kings had feared and nations obeyed, fell in silence. They left his body unburied, his head severed as a trophy for Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Egypt days later and was presented with Pompey's head, he turned away in sorrow. Tears filled his eyes. "This was not how such a man should die," he said. To kill Pompey was to kill greatness itself. Thus ended the life of Pompey the Great. He had risen higher than almost any man in Rome's history, reshaping the world with his sword, commanding empires with his will. But in the end, ambition, rivalry, and the jealousies of men brought him low. Yet his legacy endured. The lands he conquered remained Roman for centuries. His name lived on in the memory of those who saw him not just as a man, but as a titan who had once strode across the earth like a colossus. And in the shadows of history, Pompey's fall was a warning to all who reached too far, that in Rome, glory was as fleeting as the tide, and even the greatest could be swept away.